Right, this is a new format I'm going to try, and the idea is to give a little more value for money or alter people's perspective for the circuit guides. Because a lot of people say to me, sometimes when you watch a video, you can't see elevation changes and things like that. So just going to give this a little run round and see what you think, and I'd like your feedback on it at the end of the day. Now, we'll take a lap of Mugello because I've just updated my Mugello guide as it happens. And this is my take on it. As you can see from this map here, this is obviously the main paddock area and the start finish area. So we'll start off by running down towards turn one. All right, running down into turn one, there is a slight kink in the track just before you get to the braking area. And ideally, you need to be braking in a straight line, particularly as you're going over a rise at the time in the braking zone. So what a lot of people do, me included, is as you're coming up just after the start-finish gantry, there's a second gantry down near towards the pit lane exit, and I tend to run slightly across the tricolor curbing here, so I can cross under the gantry as close to the right as I possibly can. And the idea then is it's as straight as line as possible towards the braking area. One thing I would like to warn people about is just at the crest of the rise here, where the pit lane more or less finishes, but just before the braking area, right on the crest, if you're on a superbike and you're on full noise with it still full throttle, you can actually quite often get a little bit of a wheelie, which is quite alarming at thick end of 200 mph when you're just about to break into a corner. So as long as you're aware of it, it's not too dramatic then. But either way, right from the right hand side of the track, but try to straight line in towards turn one. You can't really see much of the corner till you get quite close, but you're down to about 50 yards, which is roughly your tipping point before you can actually see anything of the corner, because from the tipping point, it starts to climb ever so slightly all the way around and up towards turn two. So let's spin it round a little bit. So we've got a bit more of a perspective of the circuit. Now, again, it might show it a little bit better, but you can start to see here the incline climbing all the way through the corner. You can tell because of the landscape change here more than anything else. But either way, it's a progressive climb all the way around turn one. And from about 3/4 of the way around, you try and accelerate without drifting out too much in the track. And you ideally want to be as close to this side of the track here at the exit as possible. That gives you a really good approach to turn two and a tipping into turn two. Turn two and turn three feel very similar, but as you can see by the radius here, radius of turn one and turn two is a lot longer radius. So the focus is definitely on getting into between the two corners, mid-track, certainly not over to the right, so you can make the most of the turn two. Now, from the apex of turn two, sometimes it's difficult to see the drift out curve, and it tends to sneak up on you a little bit. So the later you can leave your tipping into turn two, the better, and that you get a good drive out into the straight. The straight out, oops, there we go. The straight running down to turn four is probably the highest part of the circuit. It's pretty much flat, but from the entry into turn four, it starts a progressive downhill all the way towards Ariabata 1 and 2. It's almost flat going through turn 4 and 5, much faster chicane, and the emphasis is definitely on getting the exit right. So you want to compromise your entrance slightly and stay more to the left so you can make the most of the right and the drive down. It's only a short straight, but it's quite important that you get a good drive onto it. Running down towards turn 6, from your tipping point, which is just after the little slip road here, more or less from there onwards, it really does start to drop away the track. And it gives like a negative camber feet type of feeling, but it's not negative camber. The camber is actually quite positive for you, but it just feels that way because of the circuits dropping away. And it also makes it quite hard sometimes from your tipping to make sure you bag the apex. Now running round turn 6 down into turn 7. Once again, rapid change of direction between the turn 6 and turn 7, and try as much as possible to get the bike again more to the right at the tip in, and that just gives you a much better run through turn 7. Now the run down towards Ariabata 1, which is turn 8, I tend to use most of the track out to the outside of the track there. The downside, because you accelerate quite hard down towards turn 8, is it can be a bit of a struggle to get from the extreme right to the extreme left, and often I only end up kind of mid-track. Not the end of the world. I've made the most then of turn 7. Either way, ideally you want to be a little bit further over to the left, ready for turn 8, and try to make the apex to turn 8 quite a long way around, thick end of 3/4 the way around the corner. And the reason for that is if you look at it from a true aerial shot, it's almost turn 8 and turn 9. If you try to make it one corner out of 2, that's the ideal scenario. But there's a short straight between the two, which makes it almost impossible to make it one complete turn. So you tend to find, even if you use the track from full left to apex to drift out, you almost certainly end up sort of sitting it up ever so slightly between the two corners. Either way, running in towards turn 9, which is Ariabata 2, this is the lowest part of the track here, and from this point onwards you're climbing up towards turn 10. Short, sharp acceleration between the two corners, and I often a little bit of a dabber brake, more of a confidence brake going into this, but literally as soon as you start to turn into the corner, because of the incline, get on the throttle. Not particularly to accelerate at this point, but the hill naturally kills the speed, so you need to be on a positive throttle going into the corner. And from the apex, which is more or less, there's a marshal's post somewhere around here, from more or less from that point onwards, you want to be actually driving hard, even though you can't see the drift out point at this point from the apex here. You can't see the drift out point because of the rise. But either way, get confident of where you're going, and you can use all of the track out to the left here as you pop up over the rise. So coming over the rise there, and this is the second highest part of the circuit, because the start-finish straight is effectively in the dip of a valley, and we're up the other side of the valley along this section of the track. Now, more or less at your braking point near the slip road here, you still can't see the entrance into turn 10. But as you close in on the corner, you're cresting the rise there, and then you start to peel off into the corner and making the apex. Now, again, from an aerial perspective, turn 10 is a much tighter radius than turn 11. So what I tend to do here is make sure when I'm leaving turn 10, I'm much closer to the right of the circuit, and then I can really capitalize on making a high corner speed and a really good exit speed onto the straight, which takes you down to turn 12. The run out curb here of turn 11, I use it quite a lot. It is quite bumpy, and you have to just be aware of that should you end up using it. Anyway, running down to turn 12, it's a relatively short straight, but quite important. And what I tend to do here is, as I'm approaching the braking area, which is roughly around about the 100-meter mark, and there's still no way you can see the corner at this point. You just got to be confident on where it is. Now your tip-in is approximately at the 50-meter mark. Let's try and get a bit closer in there. The tip-in's roughly at the 50-meter mark. Now at that point, the corner starts to reveal itself, but you've got to be committed by that point. So these large white lines here, which indicate where the markers are, that's your 200, 150, or sorry, 150, 150. It's only at the 50 when you're on the way into the corner actually sees itself. Now from the 50, it drops away all the way around to this slip road here, where it starts to level out once again. Now, if you run in a little bit hotter, you've got the advantage to run out into the track a little bit. You never really actually apex here, as long as you remember that the true apex of the corner is probably about 3/4 the way around. That's where you need to be over, because exiting this corner, you need to be much, well, right over to the right at the exit. So you sort of compromising really a lot of this corner to get in the best position for your exit. And let's spin us around so we're in the best position for the exit. Right. So as we're leaving this corner, from the 3/4 point onwards, you've maintained a reasonable pace around the corner. From the 3/4 point, there's some little marks on the edges of the curb here, which you can use. Start the drive out, but try and hold that tighter line. And what's quite important is that between the two end curbs here, that you're right over to the right-hand side of the track. Now, you have, even though you've accelerated quite hard to this point, you can't keep accelerating going through the fast chicane. I wouldn't suggest shutting the throttle, but just throttle it off without actually closing, ease back on the throttle. But even then, you'll carry on lightly accelerating and you'll end up running out of revs. So what I tend to do is in between these two curb ends is roughly where I short shift into a gear, which can take me through both corners and on the run down towards the last corner. Personally, I don't run the curb going into the corner. I get close to it, but I tend to run the second curb and then run the apex at the exit curb. So you're sort of straight lining your exit as much. And as you're going into the second apex of the chicane, you're pretty much flat out, and then just kind of look down the track as much as you can, and then try and not look too hard for the drift out curve, because if you tend to look for something, you end up riding on it. So look away from, look where you want to go. That's half of the battle. Now, it's a relatively short straight, but it's important to try and get as much momentum as you can down this straight. From around about where we are, where the cursor is here, from about this point onwards, the track starts to gradually drop away, and it starts to drop away quite steeply the first part of the last corner. But by the exit of the corner, you've leveled out once again, and the lowest point is roughly where you're coming into the pit lane area. There's a few bumps and ripples on the approach as you're tipping into the corner, which do unsettle the bike. So do really hard braking to start with, but after you've committed to the corner, you've started to peel in, start to tail off your brakes so that you're not braking too hard as this curb starts here, because this is where the bumps are, and you're just making the tyre work particularly hard at that point. Let's get another perspective. Right, let's get it right. There we go. The ideally best place to be is on the exit of this corner, is about 3/4 of the way around, is quite close to the curb on the left-hand side. If you've run in hot, again, you can run out to mid-track, recover, and then progressively get yourself back over towards the left. Now, where this little arm cog juts out here, there's a little orange section of it. And as you're coming round here, about just over half, coming up to 3/4, that long before you can see the straight itself, you can clock this little bit of orange marker. Now, as you see that, it's time to go. It really is time to really start to develop the throttle. And if you're riding something with electronics, one of the modern superbikes and that, you can pretty much pin it from here and then make it go where you want it to go. But obviously, because you're accelerating really hard, the bike's naturally trying to force itself out wide. And that's the importance of being slightly closer to the left-hand curve. If you're running wide here and you pin it, you're asking for trouble. But either way, if you're in the right point of the track, as soon as you see that orange marker, develop the throttle out onto the straight. The curb here is probably the widest curb on the circuit because an awful lot of people use it. It's only use the multicolored section. Don't use the other section beyond that. I think it's green currently. So don't go use too much of it, and then onto the straight. One other thing about it is the circuit is dependent on the organizer. There's two exit points. There's the main exit point here, which is as you're coming onto the start finish, which takes you into the pit lane, and there's a shortcut just after turn 6, which takes you down here. Now, if the organisers have said use the main entrance, whether it's red flag or whatever, that's what you use. But sometimes you get a marshal comes out of a marshal's post here and stands in the track and will flag you off here. Now, if that's the case, when you're running down off through the shortcut section here, as you get into the main exit point here, you'll be getting other people coming off the track here. So I've seen incidents happen at this point where people coming around here and people coming off the track here get tangled up. So if you're using the shortcut, look to your left. If you're coming off here, look to your right at that merge point. And obviously your speed limit line is a little bit closer to the main pits itself. Interesting format, this map, and the way you can use it, and I'm hoping to sort of incorporate it somehow in the guides. I'd like your feedback to see what you think of it and see if it's worthwhile me doing it. I'd appreciate it if you let me know. Thank you. Get on board for just $5 a month to see my exclusive content. But if you like what I do, you can subscribe on higher tiers for greater rewards.